Can Indian military take control of the government in India? Hello everyone,
I'm Rahul Devdhar.
I am Prasanna Naidu and you are listening to the Right News Podcast. Recently there was a coup in Myanmar which is just beside India to the east and this was the third coup in the country. And our other beloved neighbor to the west, as you all know, Pakistan, also had many coups till now. So in this episode, we are going to dive into this question: Why did India didn't have any coup till now, and can it have a coup in future? Like, can Indian military take control of the government in India? So let's start with the meaning of a coup. The basic definition we can say is a sudden change of the government that is illegal and often violent. Okay, is that correct, or do you have anything to add?
No, I think that is generally what it means. It is a forcible takeover of a you can say rightfully elected government. So
Hmm.
broadly, there are two elements to it that the government in
Rightfully
place,
elected,
yeah,
rightfully elected civilian government.
civilian government, and it is a forcible takeover of that government either by by military or by any armed militia also. So it's not like it
Okay.
can be a freedom fighter group. It's a forcible. It's involved armed group, but that armed group may be a military itself or any armed group.
So even if Naxalites take over, then even that will be called as a coup.
No, I think that is what I recall because there were instances of coup even in South American countries and some of these African countries, where actually the military did not take over, but a rebel group took over. So I think that is also a coup, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, cool. So, this is going to be interesting discussion because both our neighbors, like to the east and west, that there have been many coups till now, but India hasn't gone through such a phase. And I think when I was just quickly researching about this topic, I came across some video where someone was claiming that in 2012 there was a plan of the Indian military for the coup. Do you know about that? And would you like to share something?
Yes, in fact, some of these editors they publicize the sort of movement of the army as sort of what you can say dangerous movement. It was General who was the general that time. He is now a BJP leader,
VK Singh, I think.
VK Singh. So this was the general under whose command. I mean, there were some movement in the army which were, the editors and the Lutyens media were categorizing it as unreasonable movement or unforeseen movement, whereas as per the sources from the defense ministry and the army also, these movements had been already pre-sanctioned by the government. So this was movement of the army within the Indian country. So Indian army actually has two kinds of movements. One is at the front, where once it is deployed, the movement doesn't need an approval of the government. So, like for example, when they are, let's say, when Pathankot happened and the army is deployed or something, even in Kashmir or any place where army is deployed, then the movement of the army is not controlled. I mean, on day-to-day basis, there is no approval taken by the from the government. But
Yeah.
when the army is moving in civilian locations, then it is pre-approved. So, for example, if you want to send a convoy for whatever reason from Gwalior to Indore, then there will be a notification to the governments of all the involved parties that there will be army movement in this area, moving from Gwalior to Indore for whatever reason they want to move. So,
Hmm.
so that was the thing. I think it was blown out of proportion. It was completely, it was sort of a movement that was.
Okay. So from from what I understand, it was like an assumption of these media outlets, and which later turned out to be no, it's nothing like that. And they were like, okay, sorry, we thought it's like a coup and something like that. Like, right, it was something like that.
No, it is serious in nature, and you couldn't make up these kinds of things, in a country like India. And this is partly another topic for our discussion, that how these media people and these leftist organizations are trying to create divisions amongst any kind of disruption they want to they can create. They are ready to create, and that is the thing of that. But Indian military is strictly out of the domestic government side. In fact, the problem was so acute that even generally what happens is that there is an entire contingent of defense personnel which are housed in the Ministry of Defense. Okay, so these are army men, senior army men, who are acting like bureaucrats within the Ministry of Defense, because the Ministry of Defense, the government ministers don't really have the technical understanding of the army side. So they help the ministers and the secretaries and the IAS officers and IPS officers to understand what the military is thinking and how the logistical things take place. So we didn't even have that. We are trying to have that, and it is some officials are being inducted into Ministry of Defense since I think probably last 20 years or so, or 15 years, I think.
Okay, so basically, the government is trying to increase people from the military in the government. Is it that?
No, it's
right?
It's like what you can say is we have technical bureaucracy, okay, which is relevant to particular thing. Like for example, bureaucrats handle everything, including education, sanitation, everything. They think they are experts in farming, they are experts in everything. But then there is for example, there is a special services for Indian economic services, which are more in tune with economy, and these kinds of technical skills are brought in. Even judiciary has got their own services, but it is.
I mean, it had started, but they stopped it later.
Yeah, but the thing is, for technically very intense subjects, you need technical people, and bureaucrats are not technically specialist in any of these. Like Indian engineering services is also there. So which is
even I think statistical services is also there.
Yeah, so this is related to those technicalities. But for military, you need military technicians who understand military strategy, who understand modern military warfare, what kind of things. So they need to be there. This kind of specialist advice comes from technical people, and that's why these generals and 3-star generals and all are then put into sort of helping government understand the army better, that kind of role. And that also started very recently. It's not like they have been in the corridors of power making these kinds of connections. Whereas if you see in Pakistan, it's they joke about it, but it's actually true that in any other country, your country has a military. In Pakistan, the military has a country, and that's actually true. I mean, their military controls everything. So that is so it needs an ecosystem if the military has to take over, and that ecosystem doesn't exist in India. So there are two forces. If you want to have a coup, you have to have two kinds of sort of two separate legs of forces. So first leg is the army's entrenchment within the governance structure inside the country. That needs to be high, whereas in India's case that is not very high. That is in fact, it is not even minimum required. That is also not yet achieved, I think. I mean, they have been trying, but it's not yet achieved. The second leg is also critical, where you have a lot of dissonance, so social dissonance against politicians. Okay. Now, if you have a social dissonance against politicians of all types, okay, then you have that eagerness where people supply information to the military, or people align with the military, those who are trying to take over the government, or those kinds. So you need two legs, and in the one area where India has got sort of a pressure release valve is that both are shouting. Those who are pro-government are also releasing, that pressure is also getting released. Those are anti-government, their pressure is also getting released. If it builds up, like in US, what happened is that those who were pro-Trump, their voices were silenced to such a degree that they felt that they are not being represented at all in this after the elections. Once the election was declared, they felt they are not getting any audience, not even with the courts, not even with the authorities, not nowhere in the Senate. Nobody was communicating with them, explaining that Trump really lost, and they were ready to believe it. If they would have gotten that audience, and the judges would have entertained, or these kinds of and whole thing at every level, people would have listened, and people would have told them ki, see, actually what you're saying is these are 50 things that have happened, but they are not actually resulting in any of these corrupt or election hacking, as they called it, or what they called it was stealing the election. That is not happening. So there may be errors, and any process will have errors. So that built up, and it built up to such an extent that they thought that we have to march, and when they marched, they felt that we are not alone. There are many people who feel the same, and see, the thing is, always the notorious characters are few. So in the mob, 75 million Trump supporters, you find that the notorious will be only 5,000, 10,000. But when they see that we are not alone, because they are already radical, okay, they are already mental basically. So they have their own view, and they say that this government is against us, these people are against us, and true and fair country is being stolen from us, and nobody is listening. And this is the mindset they always have. Even if there is a Trump, they will also just have that mindset. But when they find that 75 million people are thinking the same, they feel we are right, and the other 74 million whatever remaining, they can't counter them. They said, we were telling you since 1976 this US government is the corrupt one, and but 1976 nothing was wrong. Okay, it was started becoming wrong in 2005, but these people will not realize. Thankfully, in India, there is no such pressure build up, and this is what the media agencies are trying to develop, that pressure. Now they want the whatever pro-Modi people to sort of build pressure against farmers or Khalistanis, not Khalistanis. That pressure should have been built by everyone, but also General Sikhs. Now they are clubbing these two. The Indian Sikhs are being targeted by these media people so that they will feel alienated with the Indian population. Now, who created this thing? Indira Gandhi. Is Modi the same line? It's so ridiculous that Rahul Gandhi is dividing the Sikhs, or not Rahul Gandhi, he is not saying anything, but the media is dividing the Sikhs to push them in pro Rahul Gandhi mode. Okay.
Yeah.
Whose grandmother actually divided the Sikhs. It's like, mind blowing. But, the thing is, Indians have been like very, very skeptical of all these media people. And, the kind of thing that Rajdeep Sardesai faced, that everyone makes a joke of him. People immediately put up memes, everyone insulting Rajdeep, including Mukesh Ambani is insulting, Rahul Dravid is insulting. No, you will say anything and you will edit it and show something else. Raj Thackeray, bashing him, Pranab Mukherjee bashing him, across left, right, everyone is bashing him. So now their value of these media people is they have become monkeys in that, that Madari ka monkey rehta hai na. It's become like that. So nobody takes them seriously, not even Arnab. People don't watch Republic because they are interested in news. They just want, they say कि वो क्या था वो कौन सा
They are interested in entertainment.
नहीं वो कौन सा था
entertainment.
Exactly. नहीं वो एक ये था ना रियल क्या बोलते हैं उसको बिग बॉस और समथिंग बहुत पका हुआ है उससे instead of that I better watch this it is real shouting, it is real thing. This Anand Ranganathan will rattle off all these things unconnected with the subject at hand, meaning it's valid what point he makes, but it doesn't answer anything. It's just a show, and that's a release valve. If you let this pressure build up of 1.3 billion, not the government, not the army, no one can survive. If 1.3 billion people, like go aata maji satakli, then it's a gone country.
No, if these are individuals you are talking about, but if it's a organization, as you said that even at some places there have been rebel group who took over the control, then it falls under the definitions.
Coming back to coups, what happens is that army or any such group, they get their legitimacy because of this dissonance in the society. Okay. If their dissonance in the society is dissipated, then there is no legitimacy to army taking over. So army also, army has a big problem. Okay. See, when particularly country like India, you have 10 lakh army. Okay. 20 lakh. If you say everyone is pro coup. Okay. So if you have 2 million people against 1.3 billion people, it's not possible. Okay. An army cannot control the entire country. Okay. In India, it is not possible that you can control the country. The country has to be on its own merit accepting whatever is going on. See, that's what I'm trying to say. It is not easy to, see, army can control Myanmar. Why Myanmar is a thing? Because Myanmar is able to have that sort of deep integration with the governance. The army has got deep network within the governance structure, so it can govern the country. And the politicians are not yet fully connected with the people as much as they should be, because this thing has come up only now. And whenever that happened, there will be despots who take over the country, but they have to have a network. You can't, like, for example, if you see this Libya dictator which they killed, what is his name?
Gaddafi.
So he had, set up a lot of good things. So he had provided a lot of amenities for the people. Like if you see, his 80% of the work is as any government does. Okay. If the 20% what he did was that, take away people, shoot them, sort of have this exotic things in his, I don't know if he's the one who had the lions and tigers in his palace or what, I don't remember which one. But they have these lions and tigers in their palace as pets. All these things, whimsical things they do. So those are the 20%. Of course, they kill people and they who try to oppose them. That's all they do. But to provide those 80% services is not easy. It's not like the army can come, if it is not integrated, it cannot come over and take up this role of providing governance and services to. Then you need compliance from many people.
Exactly. I think that is the reason any military government is not successful, or they don't survive for a bigger tenure?
If they are good, then they survive. It's not like they don't, but they need a lot of buying. And in India, that India has been a demo. It's not a Western democracy kind of thing, but we always had a difference between civilian powers and military powers. It was always there, and in fact, the military people who were involved in the military would not be involved in the civilian society unless it is on law and order related issue. So this was the differentiation being built over centuries. It's not like the British got it here. This differentiation has always been there, and that's why, in fact, it was easy for the people who were attacking India. They were surprised at this difference, that local population doesn't rise, because in their wherever they came from, like Afghanistan, beyond Afghanistan and all, they found that their whole thing was military. Everyone was military. Everyone was fighting. It's not like there were farmers who were doing their own stuff. There were businessmen who were doing their own stuff, and there were kings who were doing their own stuff. And then the businessmen from one kingdom would go to another kingdom. They would pay their taxes and they would go, and they would not feel anything, any problem. We are going to another kingdom. This was they never understood how can this be. Even in Alexander's time, it was. Even Alexander's record, the people who kept records of Alexander's visit, their own historians have documented some of these things. Some of these people, they seem to be stateless, because they move from Nalanda to this place, to that place, and everywhere they keep going and, sort of interfacing with very important people. In fact, they found that one of these fellows, he demanded audience with Porus when Alexander captured him, and Porus went to meet him. So his, this Alexander's army fellow was surprised. How can nobody come in and demand an audience with the king? And the king feels he's obliged to listen to this fellow. He's a wise man. I have to listen to him. So this is the kind of separation which existed in Indian society always. That civilians don't involve in military matters and military doesn't involve in civilian matters. And it naturally fit into the present day democratic systems. So where you have army which is doing its own stuff, and the civilian government is doing its own stuff. So by nature also we are not in that zone. So in Pakistan, I'm not sure what happened. Why people in Pakistan accept or do not revolt against the military, and why, let's say, people in Burma are revolting against military, and their military is trying to suppress them. But in Pakistan, at least, what I understand is that the people who are suppressed by military are too poor and too unorganized to create that kind of, anti-army sort of movement or revolution against the army. And they have been indoctrinated controlled by army to an extent that they find that, even army is better. And this kind of information management campaign has been run by the army since long time. So before Musharraf, there was this Nawaz Sharif was, I think, the prime minister then, and the army had started doing a press campaign with saying that Musharraf is better than this, and Nawaz Sharif should not be interfering in, he should be sent to jail or something like that. But on an average, it doesn't seem like in the realm of what you can say, the set of activities that Indian population can take over or can undertake, or even the Indian army can undertake. It doesn't seem that it is within the scope of consideration, even remote consideration, that Indian army can do these kinds of activities. So to a large extent, Indian Army and the government have been in sync with each other. So it's not like a problem,
Also, as you
at least at
as you
this time.
said that the government started increasing military's presence in the government, but for specialized services, not where they are the major decision makers. From is what I understand, right?
They are not major decision makers. I mean, they are not at all involved in non-military side. So they are, and even the military, the generals and people who are in positions of power within the military structure, in terms of analysts or whoever you want to call, who are connected everywhere, they are already well. Their scope of what you can say vision is not in this direction. Their vision is more to make army more professional and more in line with the government rather than against the government. See, it takes a different kind of mindset. At least, like for example, what prevents US Army from taking over US government? So there is, like for example, a consistent US Congress has been consistently pushing for wars globally. Okay. Now those are creating a cost on the army itself. Army, Navy, Marines all put together. Now why are they not going against the government? It's a mindset issue. So it's a more professionally aligned army, just like any other country in the world, except for these weirdos.
And yeah, I think as we have so many paramilitary forces, like there is CRPF, there is CAPF, like there are other state police forces, and there are many paramilitary forces. So with
BSF also.
BSF, so with that, the presence of the Indian military forces gets decreased a lot within India. They are involved only in national security matters. So even that is a reason for them, as they are not much, they don't get involved more into the local governance.
basically.
Yes, yeah, basically.
So no, that is true. That is true, because even CRPF and all these entities, even at the state level, you have the State Reserve Police Force, and these are all paramilitary forces. There is no alignment within them. They have a completely different structure, and basically, what you will find is that these elements are more, goal oriented. So this when CRPF is brought in for certain activity, it is brought in for certain activity and then it has to go back. And this is what has been done for every, like even if let's say there is a riot and some units are brought in, they are brought in with a particular purpose and then they go off. And it's the local police which keep the law and order situation in the current domain. They are not geared up for any sort of control of nation. Local police cannot govern themselves. Forget governing the country. So if they could govern themselves, then we would have a much better problem to have. See, for example, there is a more likelihood that an elected prime minister of the country will manipulate or assume dictatorial powers using emergency, which is what we were at, almost at the brink of emergency, this brink of dictatorship in the emergency of 1975. And people don't realize that how close we were to becoming Pakistan. And if such a dictatorship had taken place, if Indira Gandhi had truly turned into a dictator at that time, if that anti-emergency operations of Janata Party did not succeed, then we would truly have a dictator at the center, and then the army would be, people would sort of hope that army revolts and takes over the government. This is the cycle which sort of pushes it into an army dominated governance. So this, in fact, you have highlighted is a very important point, that if the civilian system is working fine, there is no, emotional, social, or any such support for an armed revolution.
Hmm.
Okay, so in 1975, we were this close to becoming a dictatorship, and I'm not joking. We were already a dictatorship for like few months, what few months, maybe almost a year. But if this anti-emergency had not succeeded, movement which was headed by Jayaprakash Narayan, it had not succeeded, then we would definitely, Indira Gandhi would have become the de facto dictator of India, and it would have been all downhill from there. And then people of India would have said or tried to influence, because see, if she would have also done the same thing as Gaddafi has done. She would control or give effective services for 80% of the time. On 20% she will be acting whimsical, and that is the exact template where the local citizens who are getting affected because of those 20% things which he has done, they will go to army and say, you take over, and that will give, because there will always be, see, dissonance spreads because army also is coming from the society. Judges are also coming from the society. If someone's wife, someone's brother, someone's father is being affected seriously because of this, they are losing jobs, they are probably losing land or losing property, they are losing income, they are losing their savings and what they had, then their friends, their colleagues, their well-wishers will be having that emotional connect to incite and take over, and that is the missing link to a certain extent. So if once you have that kind of a link to push army or any paramilitary force into action, then others will not interfere. Even though, let's say, BSF tomorrow decides to take over Indira Gandhi's dictatorship, army will stand back. It will not interfere, because army is also saying, this is Indira Gandhi. I mean, they don't say it, but they will feel it. This dictator is not a good sign. So they will hold back and they will see BSF what it does. BSF won't take over, but what I'm saying is that this is what, or if army takes over, BSF won't interfere, or Navy will not interfere. They will say, let it happen. What have we got to lose? Whereas if there is a genuine democratic system, then other forces also will have to be co-opted. Na? It's a massive exercise. So, I mean, like Chanakya says, and you can always rely on Chanakya to find this, that you have to have ears to the ground. So whoever is the Prime Minister or whoever is the government, whoever is in government, they has to take ears to the ground. What is happening? Who is the affected people, and are they getting that release? Are they getting the justice that they hope for? Maybe not 100%, but at least 80%, 90%, whatever they feel. So then they say, government is unfair, and they should have given me 100 rupees, they have only given me 20 rupees, 80 rupees, 20 rupees they have taken off. And all things, yes, like that.
Okay, so from what I understand, it's the power taken in a single hand, to be very simplistic, because
concentration of power.
Yeah, concentration of power, and usually in a coup, it's taken by a military leader. But from what example you were giving, it can also be started like a similar. It may not fall under the definition of a coup, but a similar thing can happen when a civilian leader behaves in a similar manner. For example, you said the 1975 thing about Indira Gandhi behaving like a dictator at that time. So, how can we stop this, or how can we maintain a democratic structure so that we don't experience something like this?
Actually, this is actually very fundamental, very, very, very insightful point that you brought to the discussion. That what happens is, when there are always institutions which give legitimacy to action. Okay, so when we say ki we have to take this vaccine, why do we have to take this vaccine? Because government has said that, because government has checked it and it has validated. So government is the authority which we are sort of deferring to. But not only government, there is judiciary, there is the parliament, there is the president, there is all sorts of infrastructure put in place to sort of counter or give legitimacy or at least acquiescence of legitimate of their actions is what gives that action legitimacy. For example, if government comes in and says that please do this, everyone should wear blue shirt. For whatever reason they come out and say, and judiciary says, why do you want to say? Then judiciary, that is one authority, is questioning the motives or intent of other authority, and that detracts from the legitimacy of that order or action, and that gives other authorities and people like us to question that authority.
Right.
And because we have this distribution of power across variety of institutions,
right,
and each of these institutions then sort of governs,
they can
or agrees to
keep the accountability on each other.
Yes, so this is checks and balances system which US brought into regular parlance, and this is very important and crucial that there is a distinct checks and balances and accountability and power structure within the parliament. The government is accountable to parliament, judiciary is accountable to the parliament and the president. Actually, it's not necessarily accountable to the parliament, and all these three wings are accountable to the president. President meaning it's a figurehead, but they are all separate. Press, which is unaccountable and it is a body in itself, is gone down the drain, but that should ideally, press should also have that sort of authority which comes from their being non-corrupt. If press itself is corrupt, then you will, we have had a corrupt press since 1975. That is the reason that it becomes a problem. If we had clear press, and because we have so much press, okay, we have n number of newspapers, we have 100 channels on news across the country. So some or the other part will question. So it's not like we are dependent on Lutyens or Shekhar Guptas of the world, but there are always some people who will question in this country, and in this country everyone will question.
I disagree with that point. I am a fan of Shekhar Gupta's work. Okay, so I don't.
No, Shekhar Gupta was the one who thought that army was going to do a coup.
He was
the instrument.
But whatever work I have seen, I have read till now, currently, I like that. So anyway,
no, he is, any person who gives opinions, and even us, we will not be. See, it's ours is one opinion.
Yeah,
opinion doesn't have a sanctity. In my opinion, or Shekhar Gupta's opinion, or Shashi Tharoor's opinion, whosoever's opinion is the ultimate and undistilled version of the truth. It can't be. It can never be.
And it must not be.
And it must not be. But the thing is, when Shekhar Gupta is in such a position of eminence, he makes certain claims, and even this Rajdeep Sardesai character, he said that this farmer was killed by a bullet. Then the police did not have guns. Then who? If he was killed by bullet, he must have been killed by them only, right? He is not killed by bullet anyways. He was killed by a tractor himself. So why are you making such kind of statements? Because you have some responsibility. Even Spider-Man movie, they have said कि with great power comes great responsibility. Now, almost everyone knows. It's not like it's in some highly technical moral education, textbook or some research paper that you find this statement. You have this power of media. And in fact, if you want to know, there's a movie called Mad City. I think I've been recommending this movie to many people. So it's a movie about how they change and manipulate the public opinion about a person. And that creates, these kinds of events. And they have a power. And they can question all three of these. They can question judiciary, they can question parliament, they can question the government. And they can really make the government, be disciplined in what laws they pass and but they have to first be clean. If they are seen as,
I think this debate is can take a long time, and we can have a separate podcast. But to keep it short, the main problem with media organizations is that the kind of incentive structure, because to run that they need money, and from where, so that's the main issue. So they show what they want, like what the people want, for example, as they say. So, and one nice kind of joke or something I heard recently, one person in a video, he was saying that, okay, regarding media only, or something like that, they show what the people want. Okay, people want heroin, go give them. So will you do that? No, because so that's why. So there you must be. Ethics is the core structure, the core thing in this profession.
No, ethics is not core in movies. Okay, it is core in journalism.
Yeah, journalism. I'm talking about journalism. Yeah.
Now, that you're absolutely right. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm telling you, movies are supposed to give people what they want.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. You want a dance number, we'll give you a dance number. Even in a murder mystery, there will be a dance number because you want it. Okay, that is separate.
Yeah.
This is journalism. Journalism, you're supposed to give something that you need, not want. Like you go to a restaurant, you want a dosa, you get a dosa. You go to a doctor, you say, I want a blue pill. He doesn't give you blue pill. He says, you take crocin only. I'm not going to give you anything else. Why? Doctor is also, we give people what they want. That's not like that.
Yeah.
So this is the difference. And you rightfully pointed out. But what my point in here is that there is a separation of power.
Yeah.
In the four institutions, four pillars. Okay, the government, parliament, judiciary and media. One pillar is gone. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay. This pillar is not gone, but it's like very weak.
Yeah.
The kind of thing, that strength that this pillar should have been bringing to all this accountability, to making all these other judiciary, parliament and government accountable, they are not doing it. It's us we are doing it on right views.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's like a big joke.
Yeah.
That you are not holding the government accountable. You are not putting out pieces, and this is what creates that dissonance. And this separation of power is so critical to democratic institutions, and separation of power is why the army also stays out of it, because they are not in that power structure. You can add one pillar of army, then see what happens, because they are very organized. So what I'm saying is that media has become weak, and judiciary has been shouldering a burden of a parliament which was weak because of fractured votes. Now it is no longer weak because there is a decisive vote, but at least the structure was maintained. There was integrity in whatever separation of power was, and it should continue. Thankfully, BJP and Modi and these guys are very constitution focused, which is what you want. You want people to be focused on the constitution, not saying that this constitution is bullshit. Once they start saying that, it's a danger. So that gives them the legitimacy which denies any opportunity or legitimacy to a coup. That's the sort of a flip side of the argument. See, if you are healthy, you don't need a doctor. So if the country is healthy, you don't need a coup.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that note, let's end this episode. And the last line which you said was very important. So if the country is very like on the path, at least on the path of prosperity and security, then all these problems will never occur in any such country. So thank you all for listening to us, and do follow us here so that you don't miss out a new episode, and also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and also follow us on YouTube. Thank you.
Thank you.